Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Blackhand on both Normal and Heroic in the Blackrock Foundry.
That's right, and this encounter is awesome, although it's a little strange for a last boss because the encounter itself is not very long.
Yeah, it's about 8 or 9 minutes, but I'm kind of happy with that because it's such a fucking cool encounter. It's kind of nice to have a shorter last boss, but the fight is a 3-phase fight and every single phase is on its own floor. Like after the phase is ended, he blows up the floor and you fall through, you do whatever you have to do there, then he blows it up. It's so fucking good.
It's an amazing fight.
So cool.
Now for this encounter you do want to bring 2 tanks, in a 10-man bring 3 healers, in a 30-man bring around 7 healers and bring a good mixture of melee and range DPS.
Now for phase 1, this phase is all about knocking the boss down to 70% HP as soon as possible without using Bloodlust, because you need to use that for phase 3 pretty much, so then he'll enter phase 2.
Now you need to transition the boss fast because of this creeping molten slag ability that is moving towards the middle of the room, and this lava shit will eventually fill the entire area, and if you stand in this stuff, you will die.
Now tank, something that you need to worry about is a ability called Shattering Smash. Now the boss will cast this on you, dealing large physical damage to you, and this will be split between anyone within the targeting circle around you. You will be knocked back, stunned for 3 seconds, and all of your threat will be wiped. And this will apply to anyone stood in the circle, so melee, make sure you're not stood in the circle. In this phase, you don't actually need to split the damage, so solo it. What you can do is life grip the tanks mid-air so they aren't knocked back into the creeping slag shit. Or tanks, what you can do is position yourself so you're knocked towards the middle of the room rather than to the edges of the room so you don't like stand in the horrible goo. Make sure that your off tank does taunt once his ability has hit the main tank, so of course it doesn't go around and slap melee or whatever.
Now the boss will also place bombs around himself. Every time they do spawn, make sure you do move the boss back tanks, and melee, of course, you need to watch out for them. If you do get hit, they hurt like hell, and they'll also put a nasty damage taken increase debuff on you. Not good. Once the creeping molten slag shit reaches the bombs, this will actually make the bombs explode, clearing more room for your raid, which is quite nice. So this is why you want to keep the boss tanked on the outer edges of the room, rather than in the middle.
Now every 45 seconds, the boss will make sections of the ceiling begin to collapse, spawning 2 different types of AoE circles for 20 seconds. The small grey circles you can pretty much ignore as they don't really do that much damage. However, the big red circles deal far more damage, and the closer you are to them when it lands, the more damage you take. Make sure you use healing cooldowns and damage reductions and keep as far away from them as possible.
Now for healing cooldowns, keep in mind that you should only ever have the ceiling collapse phase twice, so you want to work out when you're using your cooldowns based off that. If you get a third one, your DPS is simply too low, so you might need to alter your composition if that is the case.
Now once bits of the ceiling have hit the red circles, it will spawn a bit of debris. This will not happen with the small white circles, only with the red ones. Now this debris is actually used to counter an ability that the boss uses called Marked for Death.
Now the boss will place a debuff on a random player that lasts for around 6 seconds or so, and after the duration of this debuff, the boss will then begin to throw a projectile at them. Now this projectile can actually be blocked by players, but more importantly it can be blocked by the debris. Each debris will actually soak one of the projectiles each. However, if multiple players go behind the same debris at the same time with the debuff, the debris will actually soak all of them. If a player is hit by the projectile flat out, they'll just take a large amount of physical damage, be knocked back, and take a nasty physical damage dot that lasts for 45 seconds, and will stack if you're hit by multiple ones of these. Important thing to know about this projectile is that you can flat out immune the initial damage, so you can use Ice Blocks, Splitting of Protections, Divine Shields, but you cannot immune the dot effect. It will always be applied to you.
Even if you can use anything, everything in your arsenal will not remove it, and if it does, Blizz are going to hotfix it really quickly. They want you to take this dot effect. Now once the boss is reaching 70% HP with hopefully no more than 2 ceiling collapses, the boss will move into the middle of the room and an iron star will fall down, dealing large magic damage to the entire raid, and of course blowing out the floor. Or mastery this damage and you'll fall down into the next era of the fight and start phase 2. Now in this phase, it's your aim to knock the boss down to 30% HP so you can start the final phase. But to get there requires dealing with the same abilities from phase 1, minus the roof collapsing part and the slag slowly encroaching in and trying to kill you, but to get there you need to deal with these abilities in a slightly different way.
However, one new thing that has been added is that there is 2 balconies that spawn mobs. Now these mobs don't do anything apart from deal AoE damage to raid members below, and this damage is splash damage, so range players and healers you need to make sure that you keep spread by 6 yards just to minimize the amount of damage you're taking. However, you can't just leave these mobs, you will have to go up and kill them as the damage just becomes unhealable as more ads spawn. Now ads don't spawn on both balconies at the same time, so you'll need to see where the ads spawn first, go to that balcony, and then keep switching balconies as the fight progresses.
Now the way you get up onto the balcony is actually using the Shattering Smash mechanic that hits your tank. Each time this ability comes in, set up a small group consisting of a healer and your strongest burst and cleave DPS to stand on top of the smash with your tank and position yourself so you get knocked onto the balcony. Now right in the center of the balcony is some support beams and like a cage. Do not get knocked into these, otherwise you will not make it up. Make it so that you will just be knocked straight onto the balcony. Now once you're up there, you need to be quick and kill as many ads as possible, as you will be taking increasing fire damage, which pretty much doesn't give you much time. Once you're low or the ads are dead, drop down and get ready to be hit to the opposite balcony on the other side. However, you will be going with a different tank because of the threat drop mechanic.
Now downstairs, the boss will still do his bombs, make sure you don't stand on them, and he'll also still do his mark for death. Now this time you don't have debris to hide behind, however you do have these siege makers. These siege makers will spawn out of 4 possible gates on the outskirts of the room, and when one is spawned and it is active, it will fixate on the nearest target, chasing that player until it dies. Make it so your most mobile range DPS are stood nearest to them, and you want to kite them around the room, but kite it without it being too far away from the boss, because players targeted with Mark of Death only have 6 seconds to run behind it, and if it's on one side of the room and the boss is on the other, they've got too far to run.
Now the Siege Maker will spam a frontal slam knock-up while it is chasing a player, so make sure you're not stood in front of it as it is being kited about. Now the person kiting the Siege Maker should kite it over any bombs in the room to clear them, because otherwise they'll last forever, and also do damage to it, and it also gets the damage taken increase applied to it, just like players would do in Phase 1 or Phase 2. One thing about these mines is try and leave a couple up, because the Siege Makers do come in fairly often and you do need at least 1 per Siege Maker, so don't just clear them all out and then you'll just be fucked for the next one. So still take it over mines, but just don't go crazy.
Now if the Siege Maker hits 100% energy, he'll actually shoot out a small patch of fire in the room on top of a player. Now this fire is really fucking bad, as it spreads incredibly quickly and you'll just eventually run out of room. This forces you to kill the Siege Maker before he hits maximum energy, which if kited over the top of mines and 2 sets of Mark of Death hit him, as well as a little bit of DPS from your raid, it's super easy. That's not difficult at all. However, before the next Siege Maker spawns, you'll actually have to deal with 1 final set of Mark of Deaths with nothing to block the projectile.
Now to counter this third set, have 1 player stood right in the middle of the boss's hitbox and use an immunity. Now this will soak the initial damage and the knockback, but the player will have a nasty dot on them for 45 seconds. You need to bitch heal this target. It's a good idea to have this target be a plate wearing DPS or anyone who has high armor, because of course it is a physical damage dot and this will help reduce the damage.
Now before you have to repeat this process again on the next Siege Maker, the player that immuned the first set of Mark of Deaths, his debuff would not have dropped, so you can't make him soak again. This actually forces you to use a different player to soak each time, but if you have bops you can easily just rotate any 2 players in your raid.
Now once we have dealt with 3 Siege Makers, by the time the 4th is spawned, we tend to no longer send people up on the balconies anymore and just flat out nuke the boss until he transitions into the last phase at 30%. Now during this time that we're nuking him, we still deal with the Siege Makers in the exact same way, making sure we rotate our 2 players to immune the soak from the 3rd Mark of Death once the Siege Makers had died. Alternatively, what you could do is kind of ignore the Siege Makers, having the Hunter pretty much kite it around all the time and just dropping all the Mark for Deaths behind the Siege Maker. This means that it will be sending out mortars just before the transition. However, as you are about to leave the room anyway, doesn't even matter if there's fire all over the place. This will mean that you do get increased DPS on the boss because you don't have to DPS down the Siege Maker. However, you will need to like pretty much move for the 3rd one, whereas normally you wouldn't have to. It's kind of up to you. Either way works. Now the closer you get to 30%, the more damage you'll be taking from the balconies as more and more ads would have spawned. However, the healers cannot use big healing cooldowns as they are so required in Phase 3. So if you do use this strategy, do keep in mind that you're going to be taking quite a lot of damage towards the end of this phase.
Now once the boss hits around 31%, everyone in the entire raid uses their own personal damage reductions. We have an aura mastery, and any players that have Mark of Death debuff stacks we apply external cooldowns to them as well, as at 30% the raid will take a large amount of damage and the floor will collapse, and then you'll enter phase 3. Now in phase 3, this new area that you're fighting on is in fact a platform, and if you fall off the edges, you land in fire and you die. Now in this phase, it's all about killing the boss before you run out of room, as well as killing the boss before he kills you, as he has a ticking damage aura on your entire raid that just ramps up and up and up. Now bombs will no longer be placed on the ground and instead will be placed on players as a debuff. When the debuff times out, that player will receive a damage taken increase debuff, just exactly the same as the mines have been the entire fight, and a small crater will spawn underneath them, as well as taking some damage. We make sure that all these craters from the players that have the debuff are placed on the left hand side of the raid, as close to the edge as possible.
Now, marked for death targets can no longer hide behind debris or siege makers because there's none left, so sadly, you're forced to flat out soak them. Now, the projectile now pierces, so you cannot be stood on the raid when you are targeted by this, otherwise everyone will get hit by it. Now, marked for death targets should move to the right hand side of the boss and position themselves in such a way that they do not get knocked off.
Now, Shattering Smash in this phase deals a huge amount of damage, so much so that the tank can just flat out not solo it. If you solo it as a tank, you're just going to get one hit. And this means you're forced to have your entire raid, apart from the people who have the bomb debuff on them, the one that increases the amount of damage they take, to stack up on the tank so they all get hit by it. Now, it's really important at this point that all players stay dead center behind the tank, not to the left, not to the right of the tank, because when the knockback effect comes in, if you're even slightly off center, you can easily be shot off the platform. Now, once everyone has been hit, you'll all be knocked back, and you'll also receive a nasty dot on yourselves. And it's for this dot that we use our healing cooldowns, 1 per knockback.
Do take into account with this new Shattering Smash, you will no longer be stunned and threat will no longer be dropped either, so I guess that's something nice about this horrible fucking ability.
Now, the reason why we say it's about killing him before you run out of room is because the craters that have been spawned by the smash and by the bombs will be shortly erupted after you've been knocked back. This will spawn volcanoes that have a huge AoE circle around them, and if you stand in this circle, you take very, very large ticking damage. However, every time that you are knocked away, this does give you more than enough time and distance to actually get out of these volcanoes. So when the smash comes in, we get knocked back into the middle of the room. We then take the boss to the left or the right from the initial knockback point, get knocked back into the middle of the room again, and continue doing this until all sides of the room are filled up with these erupting volcanoes. And it's really at this point, the boss really needs to die, because the entire room is more or less filled up.
Now, if you have both tanks alive at this point and you are desperate for them, you can always kind of just, like, you know, sacrifice a tank with one of these Shattering Smashes, and that'll just hit them off, and they'll take a shit ton of damage and insta-die, and the corpse will go flying off the side, but you have some more room, and you're not getting knocked back into the
That is true, but one thing with that is that he will almost do, like, a smash around 3 or 4 seconds later, unless you have 4 players soak it. So you could technically have the tank and 3 more players soak this ability and get knocked off, just, like, as a suicide, just so you kill the boss.
Yeah.
But
it's normally very clutch. Your first kill on this will be pretty close.
Yeah, it was for us in our 3 runs, so...
Yeah, very, very good fight, though, but that's it. Once he's dead, and a fucking really good instance. Really happy about this fight.
So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide did help you out, then please do drop down a like. It helps us out a lot. And if you'd like to see any more Blackrock Foundry guides, please do click up on the annotations you see on your screen now, and expect mythic guides in the very, very near future.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.